My name is Nadita Ramachala, and I'm the manager of the Standardization Division at TTBS. So just in terms of the guidelines for today, the session is being recorded and streamed on YouTube. I would like to officially start the program. So good day to all the participants. We are pleased to have you at this session today. Ms. Latoya Burnham, Technical Officer, Quality Promotion, Cross-SKU. Mr. Fuljan Pre, Technical Officer, Standards, Cross-SKU. Dr. Terry Mohammed, Chair, Regional Technical Subcommittee for Sodium Hypochlorite Solutions. Dr. Darren Shuker, Chair, Regional Project Team for Cocoa and Cocoa Products. Ms. Nikeshi Williams, Chair of the Regional Technical Committee for Tourism and Tourism-Related Services. Ms. Andya Prasad Murad, Standards Officer, TTBS, participants and specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by wishing everyone a happy World Standards Day and thank you to all the participants for joining our World Standards Week celebration. The Standardization Division is pleased to host this session, which has the theme of Building Our Common Future with CARICOM Regional Standards. A key role in the national quality infrastructure is the development of standards. TTBS is mandated to develop, promote, and enforce standards based on the Standards Act No. 18 of 1997. TTBS is also responsible for coordinating the national input in regional and international standardization. As such, TTBS is a key member of the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standardization and Quality, CROSS-SKU. At today's session, we are happy to share knowledge and raise awareness of CROSS-SKU, our regional standards body, the developmental process for CARICOM regional standards, as well as the ability to highlight how our regional standards contribute to our common future, the implementation of the UN Sustainable Goals, and facilitate intra-regional trade. At today's session, we also have an expert panel of our key chairpersons of various committees for regional standards development to share insights on the impact of regional standards, their key benefits regarding sustainability, and also to exchange perspectives on the role of regional standards in the COVID-19 pandemic and the need for continued socioeconomic growth of our region. This session is a key part of our national standardization strategy to create a robust and responsive NSS, to create a standards-conscious society. I do hope that this session brings an improved understanding of the regional standardization system and how you can contribute to the development of regional standards for a hopeful and sustainable future in light of this year's World Standards Day theme, Standards for SDGs, a shared vision for a better world. Thank you, and I do hope that you enjoy today's session. That would conclude my opening remarks, and I will now ask my colleagues to share a video from the International Organization for Standardization to highlight this year's World Standards Day theme. Please permit us 1 minute for the video to be shared.
Imagine a world where everyone has a fair chance to succeed, where people fully recognize that we share our planet and its precious resources. A world where people can achieve their potential, wherever they come from, whichever their gender, they can access healthcare, education, and employment. A world where the UN Sustainable Development Goals have been fully achieved. This World Standards Day, we are doing much more than just imagining. We are on a journey towards a world where people's life is easier, safer, and better, and we want you to join us. Standards are born from a process that brings people together and enables them to make their needs clear and their ideas understood. They begin with a conversation, but they culminate in a solution that addresses the most pressing challenges we face. Standards play a concrete part in realizing the huge tasks defined by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In the face of a challenge which has made doubly hard by the ongoing health crisis and the strong sense of urgency created by the 2030 deadline, the global standards community is doubly committed to enabling real progress. Together with our ISO members, we are inviting you to build a world that is easier, safer, and better. I wish you all a happy World Standards Day.
Thank you. I would now like to introduce you to Ms. Latoya Burnham, the Technical Officer at CrossQ for Quality Promotions, to deliver opening remarks. Ms. Burnham first served as a Technical Officer, Communication and Information when she joined the CrossQ Secretariat in Barbados 7 years ago. The post was subsequently rebranded as Technical Officer Quality Promotions, and she has spent the last few years crafting and defining quality promotions portfolio within regional quality infrastructure development. She comes from a background in media, working for over 20 years in print, broadcast, and online media, and also has extensive experience in public relations, corporate communications, mass communications, social media management, and marketing. A warm welcome to Latoya, and Latoya, it's in the section over to you to deliver your opening remarks on behalf of CrossQ.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the introduction, Adita. Technical Officer, Standards and Technical Regulations for the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, Mr. Fuljan-Simpri. Manager, the Standardization Division, TTBS, Ms. Nadita Ramachala. Chair of the Regional Technical Subcommittee for Sodium Hypochlorite Products, Dr. Darren Shuker. Chair of the Regional Project Team for Cocoa and Cocoa Products, Dr. Terry Mohammed. Chair of the Regional Technical Committee for Tourism and Tourism-Related Services, Ms. Nakeshi Williams. Standards Officer, TTBS, Ms. Andhya Prasad Maharaj. Participants, ladies and gentlemen, specially invited guests, everyone, good morning. It is with great pleasure and humility that CrossQ accepts this invitation to address this extremely important activity as part of World Standards Day, celebrated under the theme, A Shared Vision for a Better World. I bring you greetings on behalf of the management and staff of the CrossQ Secretariat as we culminate Standards Week. CrossQ is the network of National Standards Bureaus, also called NSBs, of the 15 CARICOM member states, with a common objective of facilitating the development of quality infrastructure in our region. This includes, but is not limited to, standards and conformity assessment activities. Standards facilitate trade and spread innovations, and their development are based on international principles as set out by the World Trade Organization, such as transparency, openness, impartiality and consensus, effectiveness and relevance, coherence, and the development dimension. CrossQ engages in the application of these principles in regional standards development process, thus enabling greater acceptance of our regional standards. The theme of this webinar, Building Our Common Future with CARICOM Regional Standards, epitomizes the essence of the ISO theme. And in that, regional NSBs have a shared value and vision in achieving CrossQ's initial objective. That objective is development and harmonization of regional standards and the development of quality to facilitate trade and market access. However, with the advent of the SDGs, CrossQ has to focus on assisting our governments in the attainment of these goals by building sustainability into our standards. This is quite evident in the development of our 7 sustainability standards on behalf of CARFA, as well as the development of the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code and the energy efficiency standards for electrical appliances to reduce our carbon footprint and, by extension, contributing to the achievement of our member states' national determined contributions, which overall add to creating a better world. CrossQ is developing a standard for biodegradable products and has received a request, or in standardization parlance, a new work item proposal for the development of a compost standard, both of which will contribute to the circular economy and the protection of our environment. As a CARICOM member organization, CrossQ also collaborates with our regional partners to achieve the CARICOM's goal as set out by our heads of government, driven by their international commitments. In closing, let me wish the TTBS a successful webinar and that all the objectives are met. And at the end, that the regional standards development process is understood. In this way, we can then increase the current pool of standards developers, which is surely needed if we are to progress the work of standards, both at the national and the regional level. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Latoya, for sharing how important regional standardization is, not just the economic growth of our region, but also to facilitate the sustainable development of all the member states within the CARICOM region. I would now like to turn the session over to Mr. Fulgent St-Prix, who will be delivering a presentation on the nuts and bolts of CARICOM Regional Standards. Mr. Fulgent St-Prix is the Technical Officer for Standards within CrossQ. In this role, Mr. St-Prix coordinates the development and harmonization of regional standards. He is no stranger to standardization and its related activities, having spent 7 years as the Standards Officer, Standards Development with the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards prior to joining CrossQ. Mr. St-Prix also has extensive training in various aspects of standardization, including conformity assessment from the International Organization for Standardization and the Bureau of Indian Standards. Fulgent's varied background in standardization and its related activities provides the perfect foundation for being the Technical Officer for Standards at CrossQ. Passionate about standards and quality and its possibilities for increased trade and an improved quality of life for the Caribbean people, Fulgent consistently offers his expertise to industry stakeholders by providing the necessary training through workshops organized by the various National Standards Bureau on technical barriers to trade issues, as well as standards implementation for increased market share, market access, and safety. We invite Mr. St-Prix to share his screen, which is already being done, to look at the nuts and bolts of standards and really give us a deeper insight into what goes into the development of standards. So, Fulgent, I welcome you to start your presentation.
Thank you, Nandita. Let me just say good morning to everyone. Established, let me just observe and welcome everyone to this important webinar. Next slide, please. I will be looking to be at the standards development process, basically, of CrossQ. The presentation will take the format of what we will look at CrossQ, what it does, what is quality infrastructure, how CARICOM Regional Standards are developed, and the principles related to CARICOM Regional Standards development. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Who is CrossQ and what do we do? CrossQ is the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality. We are governed by a board of directors. Our secretariat is based in Barbados, and it comprises of technical specialists, resource mobilizers, network brokers, and project managers. We have a set of regional special committees. Next slide. We were established by the Intergovernmental Agreement arising from Article 67 of the Revised Treaty of Chaguaramas as a common supporting measures for inter alia. 1, trade facilitation. 2, enhance efficiency in the protection and delivery of goods and services. 3, improve quality of goods and services traded within the community and food states. Next slide. And consumer and environmental protection. Our mission and vision, as indicated here, mission to facilitate trade and competitiveness of CARICOM products and services for sustainable development through the implementation of regional quality infrastructure. Our vision, to the film slide. Back to slide, please. Yeah. Oh, we're going forward. Go back, please. We have missed a number of slides. Okay. So what do we do? Operationally, we had a cooperative network of 15 NSBs. We were really constituted in 2002, right? So right now it's about 19 years since we've been functional. And we are a creature of the former Caribbean Common Standards market, right? We involve in harmonization of standards and technical regulations. We promote the mutual recognition of conformity assessment products across 3 nations, inspections, testing, and certification. We provide guidance to community organs and bodies regarding matters of PI development, including dispute settlements. Next slide, please. We offer technical assistance to educational institutions, private or state-owned companies or agencies, or other entities in the community, and familiarizing them with the application of standards and standards-related matters. We facilitate quality infrastructure development at both the national and regional levels to international standards. Next. Our main objectives involve standards, as would have been mentioned, metrology infrastructure, accreditation systems, conformity assessment systems, and quality promotion. And I would have mentioned earlier that we have a number of technical committees, right, that form CrossQ and the CrossQ Secretariat. For instance, standards, we have what we call Technical Management Committee. We have metrology, we have CARIMET, and the CARIMET Committee. Accreditation, we have the Caribbean Corporation for Accreditation, the CCA Committee. Conformity assessment, we have the CANCAM, the Caribbean Network of Conformity Assessment Bodies, and we also have the TIE Committee. And for quality promotions, we have the micro committee. Next slide, please. Quality infrastructure. I would have mentioned quality infrastructure. What is quality infrastructure? We start off with standardization. As most of us know, that it's standards development and also technical regulations. Next slide, next click, please. Then metrology, which is the science of measurement. And when you talk about metrology, we talk about scientific, industrial, and legal metrology. Next slide, please. Then we have inspections, that's part of conformity assessment. Next, click. We have testing, and we have certification. All 3 of these form conformity assessment. And to underpin all of that, we have accreditations. Click, please. Click accreditation, underpinning all of these pillars. And we have a common thread that goes through all of these, right? That we have added as a region. And I must say, it is quickly being adopted by the international community. We have what we call quality promotions. Quality promotions involve awareness training marketing and communication, information, knowledge management, and education, right? And all of that put together is what we call quality infrastructure. And that is what CrossSkill is about in promoting the quality infrastructure. We assist the development of quality infrastructure both nationally and regionally where not possible nationally. It looks like this. The standards process. Right, so we have various stages. Our standard process includes roughly 7 stages, right? We start from stage 0, and where you have a preliminary work item being proposed. We could just go to the next slide, please. Like this explanation. Right, so we start from receiving a proposal from a member state. That proposal is submitted by the member state and to the CrossSkill Secretariat. The proposal normally comes from an interested party within a member state. Besides, we could come to the visit the bureau and say, I'm interested in having a regional standard, or if our institution believe there's benefit in harmonizing a standard for the region. And they discuss their proposal with the respective National Standards Bureau. The National Standards Bureau seeks to get consensus within country for such a proposal and then submits that proposal to the CrossSkill Secretariat. The CrossSkill Secretariat then takes that proposal at stage 10 and evaluates it. The evaluation consists of circulating the states, right? Member states engages the respective stakeholders and gets their opinion on development of that standard. One of the reasons why CrossSkill does that is to ensure that we're not engaging in or going into an exercise of utility. We want that whatever standard, whatever deliverable that is embarked on, that there is wide acceptance by member states and the member state stakeholders. Upon evaluation of a summary is developed and submitted to the Technical Management Committee. The Technical Management Committee then assesses the evaluation and submits a recommendation to the council on the evaluation results, indicating whether that standard should be included on the work program of the Technical Management Committee. Normally, we would require a 75% approval rate by member states to move ahead with such a standard. That's the completion. A technical committee is set up if there is not one already existing, or a technical subcommittee, or it might just be a project team, because it might just be a one-off project requested by a regional organization. And so after that, that project team will be disbanded. Then it goes on to stage 30, where a working draft is developed. The working draft is developed to be presented to the committee draft. Most times we combine the preparatory stage with the committee stage, because you might find that the technical committee, which is set up to develop the standard, is the one they would appoint someone to develop that working draft, or appoint a committee to develop that working draft. And within the stage 30, the committee stage, they discuss that working draft, they make comments until they arrive at consensus within the committee and decide, hey, this is the committee draft we would like to prefer as a draft CARICOM Regional Standard. That draft that is developed based on consensus is submitted to the CrossSkill Secretariat, where it is registered as a draft CARICOM Regional Standard. It now becomes an inquiry draft, which is now circulated to member states for inquiry, basically for comments. Member states now take this draft and circulate it to their stakeholders for comments. It's advisable that once a member state is actively participating on a technical committee, that member state sets up what we call a national mirror committee. The responsibility of that committee is to consider national positions to be preferred to the Secretariat. In other words, having received comments from the various stakeholders, these comments are being assessed by the National Mirror Committee as to which are the comments that would be preferred as a Trinidad and Tobago comment, national comment, or Jamaican national comment, or St. Lucia national comment. So in other words, we don't expect comments directly from a stakeholder to input into the regional standards development process. It has to go through the national standards body, and the NSB have to accept it as its national comment, having consulted with other partners national through the National Mirror Committee. And so one reason for that is that you can get conflicting comments coming into the technical committee for this position. So if you might have two entities commenting on the same clause of the standard, which will be diversely different. Which one of them is the national comment from the member state? So that has to be resolved at the National Mirror Committee level, and then submit the national positions in that regard. That stage of the development process takes about 9 months, right? Because there can be quite a bit of to and fro. So we circulate the document initially for 60 days as per international best practice. Then at the end of 60 days, the comments come in. It might take 60 days to complete, depending on the level of comments that are received and the extent of the comments. It might take another 60 days for completion, or even 190 days, 120 days, all depends, right? On this position of the comments, it might require a further circulation of that inquiry draft, because if the comments are significant and the changes to the draft document is significantly different, it means that the draft should be circulated for further inquiry. But this time, it will not be circulated for 60 days, it will be circulated for 30 days. Upon completion of the 30 days, it comes back to the technical committee and dispose of those comments and try to arrive at consensus as to what document is the final draft document. Now that process, right, might be extended again because based on the number of comments that you receive, you might need for another round of consultations. Right. Once the committee is satisfied that all comments have been addressed, they now refer it to the Secretariat as a final draft package. Standard. The Secretariat now registers it as a final draft CARICOM Regional Standard and then circulates it to member states along with the comments disposition sheets. All right. And member states now circulate it to their stakeholders for acceptance. Again, the voting positions from stakeholders are sent and dealt with at the National Mirror Committee. Right? The Mirror Committee comes up with the national position of the member state on that particular standard. Now, it is very important. Stage 40, I'm just going to repeat, stage 40 is very important. It is important that as stakeholders, you get hold of that initial document, that draft CARICOM Regional Standard, that you can make your input into it. One of the challenges that we have realized is that at the final draft stage, we get comments on the document. According to our procedure, we're supposed to log those comments for future review of that standard, right? But that normally occurs because we as stakeholders don't pay attention. You understand? The things are connected. It's only when we realize it has a final stage and it's going to reach our doorstep, that's when we become interested in that. And so I'm encouraging people to look out for the comments. Normally, for the draft standards, normally the National Standards Bureaus will have the draft document on their website, right? They might put a notice in the various newspapers indicating that these comments, these standards are out for comments. And another best practice that member states employ engaging is that from the time the standard have been approved for development, they will put out a notice in the local newspapers, in the local media, to inform stakeholders to look out for developing a regional standard in a particular area. And so persons and interested parties can pay attention and also contact the NSBs to say, hey, we want to be part and parcel of whatever national area committee that there is, or part and parcel of whatever technical committee that is set up for the development standard. The voting stage, the FBCRS stage of the document usually lasts about 6 months. It could be shorter than that, but it gives time for adequate consultation. Right? Normally we circulate it for a minimum period of 1 month, but it extends as much as 4 months, depending upon the interest shown in that particular draft standard. Having agreed on the national position through the National Area Committee, the member state now submits its position to the Constitutional Secretariat. The Constitutional Secretariat then compiles all voting positions and submits a report to the Technical Management. Let me just indicate the Technical Management Committee is a committee made up of representatives from all the NSBs, right? In fact, except one, which is one strand. And so we have 14 member states represented in the Technical Management Committee. Whereas those persons representing the member state on those committees, their role is process, not content. So they don't look at the content of the standard. They look at the process, and to ensure that the process was followed. We look to see who would have commented on the standard to ensure that all comments received on the standard and schools were right. So they are content, they are process managers, right? They manage the process of the regional standards. The technical officer is technical secretary to that committee, right? The technical management committee then makes a recommendation to the Cross-Review Council as to the next step for that particular standard. The Cross-Review Council assess the recommendation, and in most cases, the recommendation is upheld, and then the standard is proffered to the Court. So the Court is the one that declares regional standards. At the voting stage, we require 75% of member states positive vote, positivity rate of 75% to advance that standard to adoption, right? For adoption. If we do not get the 75% voting positivity rate, we return the standard to the relevant technical committee project team for revision. In other words, to look at the situation, they then now look at the comments that they would have received, why they did not, why this comment, the people since they vote positively for the standard, why a member state would have abstained, and look at the technical comments and dispose of this technical comments. Upon disposition of technical comments, they will decide as to what next step, right, and they should take. And let me just give a typical example. We have this very interesting and how would I say, regional standard being developed that is engendering a lot of interest. We have stakeholders, various sectors that have their interest and they're really interested. And I speak of no other standard than the revision of labor food, which is supposed to include front of package nutrition. This standard have engendered a lot of discussion, right? And it was just recently it was put out for voting. And when the voting positions were summarized, we found that we got a positivity rate of 66.67%. As a result, that standard has been returned to the technical committee to look at the comments that we received, and dispose of the comments. Thereafter, they will decide as to what's the next step. They do have options. It's on the disposition of comments. They could say those comments are significant and they will accept those comments, right? And say, okay, let's redraft. So they can go back to redrafting the standard at stage 30, right? And then it means that the draft standard will go through the rest of the stages, 30, 40, 50, right? Or they might decide those comments are received are not scientifically sound. They have not presented any new evidence, scientific basic evidence, right? And so that draft should remain the same. They also could decide that, you know, some of the comments will have said, hey, there's a study that is going to be taking place. Let us wait for the results of that study to see if any new scientific information comes out of that study that could impact on the draft standard. So all of these are the options that we can take right after disposition of the comments, right? Or they might decide, you know, we're really not worth it, let's disband the project completely. Let us just look at the review, the revision of prepackaged foods and deal with further packaging in a separate standard. It's entirely up to them. They will make their decision and offer it to the TNC for consideration. And the TNC will now pass that decision on to the courts, right? But this is a very interesting standard where it's generating a lot of interest. Once the process for approval had been completed and the standard had been sent to the CARICOM, right, for endorsement, that standard is now declared as a regional standard and it is being published, right? We usually try to publish a standard as quickly as possible, and it all depends on when we get to the final report of the meeting that approves the standard that comes with that. Some member states require us to make mention of the Savigram that gives justification for adoption as a regional standard, as well as in the forward of the standard, we usually have to make notification to the hotel meeting that approve the standard. Now, then publish a standard notification goes to member state, and member states now are supposed to adopt that standard nationally as a national standard. Standard stays in effect for 3 and 5 years. Most times we don't have the resources, the manpower resources to review the standard after 5 years. And so it all depends on whether we get funding on a particular project to do a revision of a particular standard. Sometimes it just have to be based on the work of the committee to look to see when next we could review the standard. It's a challenge that we have with the process and one that we're trying to address actively, right? And so that in a nutshell completes the regional standards development process. Next slide, please.
Gents, before we proceed, I would like to take a little break because the volume is a bit low on your end. So I'd just like to do a technical check. In the meanwhile, Andia can share the energy video that CrossQ produced while we do that technical check. Andia, please share the CrossQ video that speaks to energy efficiency and the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency, and we will liaise with Fulgence offline.
CrossQ has embarked on 2 energy efficiency projects to drive home the importance of standards and quality for the energy sector. These initiatives include the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code and the Regional Harmonized Energy Efficiency Labeling Program, better known as C. CrossQ, the network of national standard bodies in CARICOM, facilitates the Regional Sustainable Energy Agenda as it relates to testing, measurement, and inspection procedures to aid in strengthening the energy sector. At CrossQ, our approach to the development and harmonization of standards and quality is integral in transforming the way we use energy in the Caribbean. Our citizens can aspire to a higher standard of living by reducing their energy consumption through use of energy-efficient appliances and constructing safer, cleaner, and more productive workspaces. Through CrossQ's work, consumers will be able to purchase energy-efficient equipment, devices, and appliances with greater confidence and the assurance of quality and safety provided by following the C labels. With the threat of climate change and more active hurricane seasons, countries can mitigate against natural disasters when the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code governs their choices in building construction. To learn more about quality infrastructure in energy, visit energy.crosq.org.
Okay, so we will now go back to Mr. Fulgenson, free to take us through the rest of his presentation.
Thank you, Nadisa. Can we get the presentation back on the screen? We're now going to look at our principles of standards development. Standards development. And yeah. Okay, next slide. Right, so CrossQ standards development is governed by the basic principles as set up by the WTO. And it also takes on board the 3 additional principles as set up by ISO. Right? So for instance, stakeholder engagement is a principle set up by ISO, right? Where we involve stakeholders at every stage of the process. Now, our stakeholders are the NSBs of the 50 member states, and we encourage NSBs to actively engage their stakeholders nationally to ensure that they all know about the deliverable being developed by CrossQ, right? And they all participate in that process, right? Our process is also one of the principles is openness, and it's open to everybody to participate. Even third parties from other states outside of the region that may have an interest in a particular standard that has been developed, and so we can get an opportunity to comment on the standard through an NSB. So it means that the comments do not come directly to the CrossQ Secretariat, but it goes through an NSB and it goes through the National Miracle process, National Miracle Committee, and they decide on whether they should prefer these comments as a national comment. So we have examples of that. Our PEAT standards, right? We have had the American Peace Association. We have had the environmental UNICEF, not UNICEF, a UN environmental agency that takes interest in the PEAT standard, and they would have commented and submitted the comments through an NSB, and the NSB would have accepted the comments as the national standard, as a national comment. So openness is a prime principle for the standards development process. Consensus and impartiality. We encourage everyone to participate in the process and in making decisions. It does not matter who would have preferred the decision, right? It is dealt with in the same way, right, as any other person, right? Consensus is that we have general agreement. It does not mean consensus, doesn't mean unanimity. It just means that you would have taken every concern, every comment advanced and according. At the end of the day, the person or the interested stakeholder would have been satisfied that a conscious attempt was made to address their concern. It also means that there is no sustained opposition in making that position, right? And like I would indicate, impartiality, you deal with all comments the same. There's no partiality for comments coming from a private sector or comments coming from a public sector organization. It's the same thing. It's treated the same. Transparency, we try as much as possible to advertise, right, whatever projects that we're going to do in terms of standards development projects. We also encourage member states to put the projects on their website. We also include our good program on the websites so people can look and see what we are looking at, right, at all times. Okay, so that we've been very transparent in that regard. We actually have a standards development procedure, so the process is outlined and everybody can be made aware of that procedure. That's what we do in terms of transparency. Coherence, we try not to duplicate work and so that we don't have overlap. So if, for instance, there is a request for a standards evaluation, that we are aware that one of our member states are well advanced in the development of that standard in that same subject area, with basically the same scope, we allow our member state to complete that process and then we use that document as the basis for the development of a mission standard. And then a typical example of that is that during the pandemic, we know we had a number of standards that were critical because we had hand sanitizers, we had face masks being produced, right? And this is found necessary to produce standards for these areas. We had TTBS moving ahead and developing a publicly available specification for face masks. The region decided that a face mask standard was necessary. So we allowed TTBS to complete the PAS, right? And then we are now engaging in the development of a regional standard on the basis of that PAS. We have moved quite swiftly and we are ready at the draft CARICOM regional stage of that project. Market relevance and effectiveness, right? We try to use technological advancements in whatever standards we develop, right? We ensure that whatever we develop is not a technical barrier to trade, right? So it is relevant to industry. It actually fosters innovation, right? And that whatever standard is effective and relevant for the industry that it is being developed. Development dimension is where we have some NSBs that are more advanced than others. And so we would lend a hand to those NSBs that in the infantile stage, where you might just have one person in standards development. So we give them the necessary support. We also provide training to our NSBs in the standards development process. We hold their hand in some cases, right? We do that. In fact, right now we're trying our best to participate in international standards development. And so to have a regional approach towards that, we coordinate responses from member states that we will perform to the international standards development. Due process, we make sure and whatever TMC looks at the process, make sure that the process is followed in every stage and step before we go to the next stage. All right. So we ensure that the process is process. And national adoption is once we have a standard, we now expect member states to adopt it nationally as their own. And also request that all conflicting standards that exist nationally be withdrawn. Right? So we do have principle of adoption. And I think I will end my presentation. Thanks. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, these are what I would have gone for already, the code of good practice, right? Of adoption application standards. Thanks. We can move to the end. Thank you very much. And at this time, I don't know if we could entertain questions, Madam Moderator.
Because of the audio issue, we will pre-record your session and we will circulate it to the presenters. We've had some comments in the chat, but we can ask for the participants to put their questions in the chat and we will address them. Yeah, we can check the questions there, but we also have the Q&A that will be coming up.
Thank you.
So thank you, Fulgence. We apologize for the slight technical difficulties.
That's okay. That's fine.
But I think we were able to get the main points. So I encourage all the participants to put their questions in the chat and we will take a look at them a little later on in the session. But I would like to move to the other part of our webinar today, which is the technical presentation component. So thank you, Fulgence. We appreciate your presentation. And we will be looking at building a sustainable common future with CARICOM Regional Standards. And first off, we have Dr. Terry Mohammed, who is the chair of our Sodium Hypochlorite Solution Standards Project. Dr. Mohammed currently holds the position of Deputy Dean Outreach in the Faculty of Science and Technology, lecturer in Analytical Chemistry, Industrial Chemistry, at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. Dr. Mohammed specializes in quality assurance, quality management systems, LIMS, and analytical methodologies. He attained his BSc in analytical chemistry from UWI, his PhD from UWI, and an MBA from the Harriet Watt University of Edinburgh. Before starting his career at UWI, Dr. Mohammed worked at the Institute of Marine Affairs as a scientific officer. Then he joined Petro-Trin, where he held the positions of supervising chemist, head chemist, quality assurance chemist, and aviation jet specialist. He is currently a member of the steering committee for the Trinidad and Tobago Chemistry Olympiad, vice president of the Trinidad and Tobago Chemical Society. He serves as a technical auditor for TTBS, a member of the Laboratory Accreditation Council. And as I indicated before, he is the chair of our regional technical subcommittee for sodium hypochlorite solutions. So thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for agreeing to do this presentation, and I turn the session over to you.
Thank you very much, Nadita. Let me share my screen. Okay, so fellow participants, invited guests, members of the Quality and Standards Committee, I wish you all a happy World Standards Day today. Well, it was yesterday actually. And I'd like to commence on my presentation. As Nadita mentioned, I was the chair of Sodium Hypochlorite Solutions Liquid Chlorine Beaches, Harmonized Standard for the region. Just to let you know a little bit about liquid chlorine bleach. Liquid chlorine bleach has been used for generations to disinfect all kinds of environmental surfaces. It helps to keep drinking water germ-free, and it makes swimming pools healthy. It can be used to whiten products, including laundry, paper, soap, straw, and cotton, and more, of course. Because it's one of the world's most common and affordable disinfectants, bleach plays a key role in public health. Bleach also has been proven to kill the COVID-19 virus as well. So it is also quite popular in sterilization activities. Chlorine bleach is also one of the most common laundry detergents and whiteners available, and it's probably one of the most popular whiteners around. This white shirt I'm wearing actually is white because of good quality chlorine bleach. Right? The Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, recommends a 0.05% solution as a sterilization fluid and recommends a dilution of 40 mils in 1 gallon. So this is what they recommend to sterilize surfaces and common areas. Sodium hypochlorite is produced in 85 countries, so it's quite widely produced. Since the end of the 19th century to the present day, its production has increased from 35,000 tons to 44 million tons. That's actually 1,000 times, well, more than 1,000 times increase. The global demand has risen and it continues to rise. From what we can see, over 50% of the production comes from the United States. Sorry, 50% of the demand comes from the United States and Western Europe, with demand being generally pretty high. In our region, which is Central America, which is Central and South America and the Caribbean, the demand is typically about 5% of the global manufactured quantities. In terms of manufacturing capacities, the United States and China produce about 50% of the global chlorine contents in the world. Caribbean produces less than 1%, with our markets being almost exclusively local and regional. Very few of our products are actually exported extra-regionally. Our demand for bleach, however, outweighs our current capacity to produce it. And this leads to significant imports, where we tend to find a lot of imported chlorine from the United States and Central and South America entering our markets. With the global demand for chlorines set to increase further, especially with this pandemic, with this COVID-19 pandemic, and the need for constant sterilization of work areas for us to start going back out to work and schools, etc., the region can capitalize on this expanding market. Now, in order to do that, there were a number of challenges that us as the Caribbean faced. Right? Even though we are part of a CARICOM community, we are still a series of individual islands. And as a result, in the Caribbean, chlorine bleach was being manufactured to various specifications, from 4% to 7%, with some products being as high as 11%. Right? In some countries, they didn't even use us one particular standard. We had a ranges between 3 to 5%. Okay. So this made things challenging, as it was not straightforward to harmonize and find one particular chlorine range. With the pandemic, chlorine bleach has become an essential tool in sterilization, right? With so many different concentrations, how do you get the correct mix? Say if you have some countries having 3.5% and some countries having 7%, right? How do you get the correct concentration to sterilize? I mean, you need to have probably a degree in analytical chemistry like myself to do some of those calculations. So having one particular standard actually makes the product simpler to use throughout the region. And what are these harmonized standards? Well, by definition, a standard is a document that provides requirements, specifications, guidelines, or characteristics that can be used consistently to ensure that materials, products, processes, and services are fit for their purpose. And some of the benefits of these standards include things like cost saving, because international standards help to optimize the operation and therefore improve the bottom line of an organization. It helps to enhance customer satisfaction and protection, as international standards help to improve the quality, enhance the customer satisfaction, increase sales, and improve the customer experience. In our case, the harmonized chlorine standard will also tend to improve customer protection as well. Harmonized standards allows us to have access to new markets. International standards help prevent trade barriers and open up global markets. So if products that are being manufactured, let's say in Guyana, can now be sold in Jamaica, Trinidad, and the other regions, because we have one standard for the region, right? In cases where we have different standards for different countries or even different regions, it makes it difficult for us to export our products. For example, if the region's harmonized standard is not aligned with global standards, then we would be unable to export our products, unless, of course, special concessions are made. It allows us to have increased market share. International standards have to increase productivity and gives us a competitive advantage. Having standards allows us to have environmental benefits. Every standard has some measure of environmental protection embedded in it. International standards help to reduce the negative impact to the environment, whether it's from improved manufacturing processes, improved storage, improved packaging and labeling, even disposal. Our standards tend to cover all these areas. Standardization ensures consistent quality and enhanced customer satisfaction and protection. So what was my experience as chair of the CARICOM Committee on Sodium Hypochlorite Solutions? Well, one thing I found very pleasant was that the Caribbean region is much more cohesive and much more united than initially expected. Team members, especially my team, believe that as a united region, we have a greater impact in the world's economy than if we were to stand alone. And team members were always supportive of each other. I find this to be very unique, and I found it to be, I was very proud of my team. Right? Team members did something that a lot of others that I have encountered don't usually do. They listen to each other. There was never ever anyone trying to have greater airtime than the other. They all listened. Very important listening is. Right? This shows that the Caribbean region has matured, and the Caribbean region is now one that is ready to take on the world. As a people, we see ourselves as first rate, although there are times when people try to make us look second rate. We actually don't accept it. Right? We demand the best. Team members therefore ensure that harmonized standards were all world-class and consistent with global demands. They did not compromise on the quality of the standards that they were working on. They always wanted it to be the best. And they didn't want it to be the best just for global trade. They wanted it to be the best because it was being used by us as Caribbean people, and we deserve the best. So therefore, we wanted to make our standard the best. We did not compromise. And I have to quote from one of my colleagues on this committee. They use the word future-proof. When we were preparing standards, you always think of what's going to happen in 10 years' time. So that our standards always address those. So you don't have to be revising these standards all the time. They were also future-proof. So there was no compromise. The standards harmonized with international world class, and they were also future-proof. We had very forward-thinking members of our panel who were always thinking ahead. I find that to be very commendable. The team ensured that the standards always protect the consumer by ensuring a consistent quality of your product. These standards went on to define things like quality of your product, lifespan, define the packaging, storage, labeling, transportation, etc. Everything that goes towards the final product was covered under these standards. So regional harmonized standards therefore ensures that the region provides the highest quality of product itself. It allows us to enter a global market without any barriers. These standards not only protect our citizens and strengthen the bonds within the region, but also allow us to become a global force. And it's about time the Caribbean region becomes a global force. Right? We are a global force in other areas like sports. I mean, if you look at the most recent Olympics, the Caribbean always performs well. Right? We are a global region in terms of arts, and we're very talented people. And a little known fact, the Caribbean region has the most Nobel Prize winners per area, per population. That is a fact. It just goes to tell you that the Caribbean region is actually a very strong region. We just haven't recognized it for ourselves sometimes. And this brings me to the end of my very short, hopefully very sweet presentation. And I'd like to ask if you have any questions. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for your presentation. We are getting some questions in the chat, but in the interest of time, I think we should take all the questions as part of the panel discussion. So if that is okay with you, we can move on to Dr. Shuker to deliver his presentation, and we will just compile all the questions that we are getting in the chat. So thank you, Dr. Mohammed. I thought one of the most interesting points would be the point that you raised about our regional committee members listening to each other. And that really emphasizes that standardization is really about human beings agreeing and achieving consensus. So it doesn't matter what technical discipline, but listening and sharing the knowledge and expertise is something that we greatly appreciate with all our technical committees. So on that note, I would like to introduce Dr. Darren Shuker. Dr. Shuker is a research fellow at the Cocoa Research Center, the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. He leads the food technology section that works in 4 thematic areas: research, training and outreach, quality management, and product development. He's also actively engaged in local, regional, and international training and outreach activities on cocoa, post-harvest quality management, sensory evaluation, chocolate making, and standards development. He has worked with many cocoa stakeholders, farmers to chocolate manufacturers in different cocoa producing regions on internationally funded cocoa projects and consultancies in his 25-year career. Currently, he serves on the International Cocoa Organization, ICCO, panel of experts on fine or flavor cocoa, the working group on international standards for cocoa quality and flavor assessment, the Heirloom Cocoa Preservation, HCP, Advisory Council and International Panel of the Fine Chocolate Industry Association Heritage Preservation Fund, as well as many other technical committees. He has chaired the ICCO Expert Working Group on Fine or Flavor Cocoa, Food Advisory Subcommittee and the review of the CARICOM Regional Standards for Cocoa and Chocolate Products, as well as the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards Specification Committee for Cocoa Quality. So after that long introduction, I'd like to turn the session over to Dr. Shuker to go through his presentation. Thank you so much.
Right, so thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the TTBS for the invitation to present and also for the opportunity to serve the standardization process. And I'd like to also wish everyone a happy World Standards Week, nonetheless. So I'll get right into it. I am going to talk about under the theme of building a sustainable common future with the CARICOM Regional Standards. I'm going to talk about the cocoa and chocolate products specification that was developed. And the first thing really is, who doesn't like chocolate? From young, old, and in between, chocolate has the power to gladden mortal hearts. And this is exactly why having a regional standard for cocoa and chocolate products is important, because it affects every facet of our population, every age group, from young and old, and from young to old and in between. So we need to make sure that this stakeholder group is protected. One other rationale for having a regional standard is that the Caribbean region produces fine or flavor cocoa. 8 countries in the CARICOM region are recognized as partial or exclusive producers of fine or flavor cocoa, and that type of cocoa commands a premium price, 2 to 3 times over that of bulk cocoa, which is used mainly to make your mainstream milk chocolates, whereas fine or flavor cocoa is used to make your premium quality dark chocolates. So there's a great opportunity for the region to maximize revenue along the cocoa value chain in terms of leveraging the flavor diversity, not only for cocoa beans, but also for chocolate products. So there are a number of opportunities for the region. Looking internationally, there's also an evolution in the global chocolate industry, where the international chocolate market is expected to be worth over 160 billion US dollars by 2024, with a compound annual growth rate of 7%. And there's also a shift in consumption of chocolate. Now we have a regular consumption of dark chocolate, not just as a treat, because it's associated with increasing health benefits in terms of heart health, the cognitive function of an aging population. And I know people who they consume chocolate like a supplement. So there's a new and emerging market for chocolate in that regard as a health food. We also have more sophisticated and demanding consumers who want certified traceable cocoa, but they're also looking for unique products and consumption experiences, where we have niche marketing of chocolates, not only, let's say, dark chocolates, but dark chocolates from a country, dark chocolates from a region in a country, dark chocolates from an estate, and even varietal chocolates. So this has fueled a change and a growth in the consumption of dark chocolate. Now it's 31%, it accounts for 31% of global chocolate consumption. Most people still eat milk chocolate, but that gap is changing. So we have an increased consumption of dark chocolate. So with this new opportunity for our cocoa and chocolate, it also brings pressures, new pressures for the region in the context of, for beans, a more consistent supply of beans from origin. So we have to be more productive. We have to mitigate against climate change that affects the cropping cycle, that affects disease pressures. It also affects how we view cocoa. Cocoa is not just a thing anymore, it's a food ingredient. And this is a big shift in mindset that is very important in terms of the quality and respect that we treat cocoa beans as a food ingredient and how we define quality. In the region, we have a very young bean to bar chocolate segment. So there's a steep learning curve on making chocolate at origin. And then there's this whole perception that, can we really make good chocolate at origin? We're competing against the old world in terms of the established brands from North America and Europe. And we are quickly showing that, you know what, you can make good chocolate anywhere. We have this unique flavor diversity from our region, and we have to better understand how to interpret this and how to market it. There's also demand for traceability of ingredients along this chain of custody that is required in what could be a very convoluted value chain from getting cocoa beans to chocolate making. So there are new pressures for the region. So we need to build what I like to call a quality ecosystem to deal with these pressures. And the three pillars upon which this ecosystem rests upon are firstly the people, the legal framework, and the environment. So we have people who are trained, we have the legal framework in terms of the national quality policy, and we have an environment where it's facilitating for building a quality ecosystem, where first and foremost, we have standards and standard operating procedures. We have the quality infrastructure, the human capacity, and then we have labs and certification to satisfy the markets. So these are the components of what I like to call our quality ecosystem. And therein lies the rationale for this standard, the CARICOM Regional Standard for Cocoa and Chocolate Products, CRS 34/2018, which was approved by COTED at its 46th meeting in May 2018. It superseded the previous standard that was approved in 1994, and it was a revision, but also considered a lot of change that would have occurred in the marketplace for growth in dark chocolate between 1994 to 2018. So it supports increased interest and regional growth in the production of fine and flavor cocoa origin chocolate products. It sets about minimum requirements for composition, contaminant limits, and quality of cocoa and chocolate products that are manufactured and traded within the region. And I was blessed to have a really nice team. So the regional project team was hosted by the Food Advisory Committee of Chemistry, Food and Drugs Division of the Ministry of Health of Trinidad and Tobago with the support of TTBS, and I was asked if I could share it. And from the onset, we try to have this sort of dynamic equilibrium between research, industry, and government. And within industry, we made sure that we had that representation between the smaller scale bean to bar chocolate makers, the intermediate scale, and the larger scale. And as was mentioned by the previous speaker, I was also blessed to have this group of people that really listened to each other, learned from each other, and was forward thinking. What in terms of how will this industry evolve in the next 10 years, and how can this standard, what can we do with this standard so that it remains relevant for as long as possible? So the scope of the standard was to specify requirements for the composition of food products derived from fermented and dried cocoa beans. It did not consider raw cocoa products or products made with cocoa beans that were unfermented or unroasted. It did not consider confectionery or other food products where chocolate or cocoa powder was just a flavor. And it did not consider the pharmaceutical or the cosmetic or non-food uses of cocoa and chocolate. So what was considered on the standard was the full range of chocolate products, ranging from unsweetened chocolate, which is liquor, cocoa liquor, so it's not alcoholic, it's just called liquor, to chocolate, then considering the different types of chocolate in terms of sweet chocolate, plain chocolate, milk, coatings and couvertures, milk chocolate, dark chocolate, extra dark chocolate, and white chocolate. So this is where having that sort of multi-stakeholder grouping in the committee, in the team, really added depth and breadth to what we considered. And I was reading over the standard last night and I was thinking, wow, it was really quite a process to really come up with something that was that considered everything and also tried to predict. And within that prediction, we were also considering the evolution in terms of not only chocolate, but cocoa powder and other cocoa products. So we had, for example, cocoa shell infusions, which are actually now being marketed. We also considered coarse ground chocolate, or the sort of traditional cocoa balls that people are accustomed getting in the marketplace and so on, cocoa powder. And you only have to go into the supermarket or the gourmet shops now, and you will see how the product range has really evolved within the last 5 years, actually. There are also other ingredients that are being added to chocolate as inclusions and were food additives. So we try to consider all of these things. Also, we looked at things that should not be there, the contaminants. We looked at packaging because we recognize that in the Caribbean, in the region, sometimes we do in fact have very good products, but we fall behind with packaging and labeling. And I must say, we have really stepped up. And I gauge the growth of chocolate makers by the iterations of packaging that they would have gone through. It's a sort of reinvention. And I must say, I'm really proud to see the quality of products and standard of products coming out in the region. And this is bolstered by testing. And testing must be supported by adequate and representative sampling protocols, and methods for the items that you want to test for. The standard was supported by a range of annexes. So it predated the national standard for cocoa beans. So there was some element in the annex that considered cocoa bean quality, also the processing facilities linked to the food safety standards. And then we looked at the summary composition of chocolate products. And again, drawing on the experience from the members for the range of chocolate products. We looked at cadmium. cadmium being a real issue for the region, especially those islands that have volcanic origins and their soils are of volcanic origins, where cadmium is a naturally occurring element in the soil that is a food safety consideration, especially for European Union markets. We took a deep dive into sampling for testing for the different types of tests that we want to do and how the test samples need to be treated for the different range of products, and put together a listing of testing methods that are suitable for cocoa and chocolate products. Because at the end of the day, to leverage the opportunities that exist for our region, we need to build standards that are relevant, standards that are pragmatic. And since that time, in Trinidad, we have put together and created the national standard for cocoa beans, specifications and quality requirements that draw heavily on the ISO standard. And now we have a new work item proposal for a regional standard, and it's going through that process that the first speaker spoke about, where we're looking to have a regional standard for cocoa beans, because this feeds into the burgeoning chocolate industry. So they will go hand in hand together, looking at sampling the specifications, but also leveraging on that fine or flavor cocoa heritage. So we are creating a new element to the regional standard that embraces the fine or flavor heritage, as well as the sustainability and traceability issues that the new market space requires of us. So what are the benefits of this standard? Basically, we have improved cocoa and chocolate product quality, both in terms of physical, chemical, microbial, flavor, and aroma. We have had the opportunity to use this standard now to build a stronger quality infrastructure in terms of product specifications, human capacity, the physical infrastructure, testing labs in each of the chocolate facilities, and most importantly, legal definitions for the different products. This has allowed us to really level the playing field between local and regional products to the foreign products, where no longer do we view the foreign products as superior. We actually view them as equal, or if not, our local products are better tasting. So we have an improved marketing position for regional products. And I can say that unreservedly, that we really have stepped up our game and towards building strong brands for the region as a whole, for the countries in the region, and for the farms. Because at the end of the day, all of this resides with the farmers of the region who grow cocoa beans. So the benefits of this standard, of this specification, must redound to better farmer revenue. And in this regard, we can now leverage the niche marketing of our regional products. So we don't want to compete with the Cadbury's and the Hershey's of the world. We have boutique market access with our fine or flavor cocoa. So these are the benefits that I consider for the regional standard for cocoa and chocolate products. And I just want to say that it's been a great pleasure to be part of this process, to contribute towards it. And I look forward to continuing my role as we push forward with the regional standard for cocoa beans. And I just want to thank everyone and thank the TTBS for being such an easy organization to work with and a facilitating partner in this process. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shuker. We definitely appreciate both you and Dr. Mohammed sharing these regional committees and sharing the expertise that we have locally with the region. So I will now turn the session over to Ms. Nkechi Williams. Ms. Nkechi Williams Standerson is a standards officer in the Standardization Division at TTBS, and her primary responsibility is the development of standards in the area of tourism and quality. In her 13 years at TTBS, she was responsible for the development of over 10 national standards projects in the tourism sector. She participates in regional international standardization and attends numerous meetings as a national representative. In addition, Nkechi is a lead auditor for quality management systems and holds an associate degree in hospitality management from the Trinidad and Tobago Hospitality and Tourism Institute. She has a BSc degree in hospitality and tourism management, as well as an MSc in tourism development and management from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. So without further ado, I'll turn the session over to Nikeshi to deliver her presentation.
Good morning, everyone. All protocols observed. I'll just start. Great. So today I would be presenting on the Caribbean Tourism and Health Program and the CARICOM Regional Standards for Sustainable Tourism. So to put things into context, I will tell you a little bit about the Tourism and Health Program, the reason for the program components, the role that CROSCU plays within the program, and then we'll go into the Regional Health and Safety and Environmental Tourism Standards and their scope. The Regional Tourism and Health Program is a novel, innovative program that aims to enhance the health and well-being of visitors and locals by improving the quality, competitiveness, reputation, profitability, and sustainability of the Caribbean tourism industry. So this program is about improving countries' capacity to provide both quality and cost-effective health, food safety, and environmental sanitation solutions to the hospitality, health, safety, and environmental threats impacting on the sustainability of the tourism industry. The program is being executed by the Caribbean Public Health Agency in collaboration with the Caribbean Tourism Organization, the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, and other Caribbean countries. So CARFA signed a landmark agreement in 2014 with CTO and CHTA to develop and execute the multi-pronged integrated tourism and health program in the Caribbean. Funding was obtained from IDB, which is the Inter-American Development Bank, and that funding was obtained in 2016. CARFA is the Caribbean sole public health agency responsible for preventing disease and promoting and protecting health, right? So that's CARFA's mandate. So the genesis of the program lie in the fact that the Caribbean is a tourism-dependent region. So the health of the Caribbean economy is closely related to the health and sustainability of the tourism industry. Increasing visitor arrivals can bring with it so many benefits, but it can also bring with it negatives such as health, social, and environmental challenges, including international spread of diseases and viruses. There is no better time than now as new threats to health and travel in the region and the entire world has emerged. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a health and economic crisis with devastating effects on countries, especially those dependent on tourism. In this era of real-time information flow, creating mechanisms for monitoring and responding to the tourism health and safety threats and systems to mitigate against these threats are important. This integrated multi-sectoral program is the Caribbean's first program of its kind, and it sets an international precedent for improving sustainable tourism. So the major components of the regional THP program are a web-based real-time tourism health information monitoring and early alert response system, the acronym THMRS. This allows for early real-time detection of public health issues. This is also accompanied by a regional guideline for a science-based harmonized regional approach and response to tourism-based illnesses. Second component is training and certification in advanced food safety and environmental sanitation. Improving food safety is key for for providing a safe and healthy tourism product. This will build countries' capacities and allow for international certification. Third component is a Caribbean-wide HSE tourism standard with certification scheme. This component will review national, regional, and international best practices and update the existing regional standard to meet current regional and international HSE tourism standards. Also, to develop a certification scheme against the requirements of the regional standard. So CROSCU was given the responsibility for facilitating the development of these regional standards and the certification schemes. CROSCU, as a regional organization responsible for CARICOM Regional Standards, took on the task of the THP Component 3, which is the Caribbean-wide HSE tourism standards. So under the authority of CROSCU, 7 regional standards related to hospitality, health, safety, and environmental tourism were developed. The 7 standards constituted a set of preventative interventions to effectively address public health and environmental issues that impact local and visitor population in the Caribbean, and to support sustainable tourism and the region's effort to remain competitive in the rapid evolving global tourism trade. So this slide highlights the 7 CARICOM regional standards that were developed. These standards are now at the final stage of development, so we now at the final approval stage. So I'll just go through each standard, right, just briefly, and I'll give you the intent of each. So the first standard, environmental management system, the standard is intended to provide a framework for the development of an environmental management system within the tourism establishment. The standard covers EMS that focuses resources on meeting the commitment identified in the organization's policy, which could include reducing or eliminating the negative environmental impact of its products, services, and activities, and/or increasing their positive effects. The energy management and efficiency. This standard is intended to provide a framework for the development, implementation, operation, and evaluation of an effective energy management and efficiency system, including the potential for use of renewable energy sources in the tourism establishment. Food safety and sanitation. This standard is intended to provide a framework for establishing food safety and sanitation programs within the tourism industry with consistent monitoring and evaluation and implementation of best practices. The water treatment and management efficiency. This standard is intended to provide a framework for the development, implementation, operation, and evaluation of an effective water treatment and management efficiency program, as well as to ensure an adequate potable water supply at tourism establishments. Solid waste management. This standard is intended to provide a framework for the development, implementation, operation, and evaluation of an effective solid waste management program for tourism establishments. It is expected that this standard will enable tourism establishments to implement sustainable solutions to reduce the impact of solid waste on the environment while incurring minimal disposal costs. For sewage treatment, the intent is to provide a framework for tourism establishments for the effective management and treatment of sewage to minimize potential hazards to patrons, the environment, and the public health and safety. And the last standard is the integrated pest management. The intent is to provide a framework for establishing integrated pest management programs in the tourism industry by applying a systematic and environmentally sensitive approach to prevent pests by emphasizing the use of materials and methods that minimize the impact on people and the environment and limiting the use of pesticides. So these regional standards were developed under the supervision of the Regional Technical Committee for Tourism and Related Services, RTC 6, hosted by CARICOM member state, Barbados and St. Lucia. The Regional Technical Committee comprised of the following countries and their respective organizations. I'll just go through the countries that were represented. So we had Belize, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Lucia, Jamaica, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, and we had 2 regional organizations, CTO and CHT. So I would just like to thank you for today. I'd just like to also say a special thank you to the Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Peter Lord. He actually held the mantle when I was on extended leave, so I'd like to thank him for that as well. And I'd like to say special thanks to the Secretariat, Ms. Renata Seeley, Gillian Porter, and support by Zamala Haynes. As you can imagine, dealing with 7 regional standards was indeed a task, but we are near the end of the process, and I'd just like to say thank you for those persons. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikeshi, for giving us an overview of those 7 tourism standards for the region. So I'd like to bring the presentation component of today's discussion to a close and immediately move to the panel discussion. But in addition to the panel discussion, we have received a lot of questions in the chat. So I would like to proceed with the Q&A section so that we can address the comments that came in from the stakeholders present today at the webinar. For the panel as well, I'd also like to introduce Ms. Andya Prasad Miraj. Andya is a standards officer within our standardization division. She has studied engineering at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, before proceeding to work in the fast-paced oil industry as a designer for wellhead equipment. Passionate about quality and standards, her move to the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards was a natural fit. She leads the national standards portfolios for automotive products, energy efficiency, mechanical, and occupational health and safety. Andya is currently the national representative at the Technical Management Committee of CROSCU and the chair of the editorial committee for the CARICOM Regional Standards. Internationally, she's a member of the ISO DevCo Working Group 2, sharing resources to enhance national standards bodies' capabilities in the development and use of standards. And a big announcement regarding Andya, she is the recipient of the 2021 ISO Next Generation Award. So without further ado, I will take a look at the questions that have been placed in the chat. I invite our panelists, Dr. Shuker, Dr. Mohammed, Andya, as well as Nikeshi, to turn on their cameras. And let me go to the questions that came in on the chat. And we had some very interesting questions. A lot of them came in from Mr. Miguel Singh. And in scrolling through, so this first question is one that I would direct to Dr. Mohammed as the chair of the Committee for Sodium Hypochlorite Solutions. All products that have carcinogenic and cancer-forming compounds should be discontinued. And he has a recommendation in terms of a number of products that can be considered alternatives. So Dr. Mohammed, would you like to comment on that? Because he also went on to say, why not use vinegar as compared to chlorine, bleach, Clorox, etc.? And simple chlorine in many forms is more efficient in killing microbes than acetic acid. That came in from Niran Bihari as a response. So would you like to comment on that particular issue?
Yes. Mr. Bihari is correct, actually. Chlorine bleach is actually much more efficient at sterilizing than most other items that are used. And by the carcinogenic compounds that Miguel is referring to, I believe he's talking about dioxins, right? Because there have been some research that shows that dioxins can be produced from bleach, Typically, it is produced from pulp making, the bleaching of pulp to manufacture white paper, right? So in order to get dioxins, you need to have the raw material present to react with your chlorine to form dioxin. In normal, regular domestic usage, there haven't been any reported cases of those. So in terms of being carcinogenic, right? The only item really is dioxins. Chlorine itself has not been found to be carcinogenic. So once you don't have situations where dioxins can be produced, which is typically wood paper production, then it is relatively safe to use still, as far as reliable research goes.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Thank you for giving us your expert position on this matter. I would like to bring in Dr. Shuker because there's a related question. In establishing a standard for chocolate or cocoa, coffee, etc., are the effects on the brain areas analyzed, especially the effect on children? And he went on to say that research has shown that the effects of chocolate can be the same as that of video games that have now been categorized as an addiction and contributes to mental health problems.
Right. So thanks for that question. Well, basically, in crafting the standards, the mandate was to look at specification in terms of formulation and consistency in terms of across the range of products that can be created with cocoa and chocolate, and tying it into the existing standards in terms of the Codex Alimentarius definitions in terms of what is a legal definition for dark chocolate, milk chocolate, etc. So it did not consider the medicinal or the pharmaceutical element of the product, which is a totally different area of concern. Now, with respect to the medical studies or the studies cited or mentioned, I personally have not seen studies linking the consumption of chocolate to declined mental health or the use of your mental faculties. Actually, there are a number of studies linking the consumption of dark chocolate to increase cardiovascular health and cognitive function. And I've been part of two studies. One that we did right here in Trinidad, where rats that were fed a cafeteria diet were less able to navigate mazes compared to rats that were fed a dark chocolate supplemented diet. And currently, I'm engaged in a study looking at the effect of dark chocolate consumption on blood platelet function. So I think the addiction that resides with chocolate consumption could be related to the sugar content. So most of the chocolate that is made with beans from the region are either dark chocolate, and this is better suited for the niche marketing element that I mentioned, or dark milk chocolate. So the more mainstream chocolates would have a higher sugar content, and they would tend to fall more into the realm of confections. So it's just to probably go back and look at those studies and see what type of chocolate they use, if they use dark chocolate or they use milk chocolate with high sugar content.
Thank you, Dr. Shuker. I think, we also have to look at the effect of sugar, sodium, and other components. And I think Fulgence was alluding to that earlier in speaking about the standard that is up for much debate, prepackaged foods. And CROSCI is also doing work in terms of nutrient labeling. So on that note, thank you, Dr. Shuker. I'd like to bring Fulgence in because there's an interesting question for him. And the comment is, CARICOM needs to have uniformity and one standard, and that is only achieved in the OECS. So the question is, why not adopt the OECS standard?
My
Hi, Fulgence.
Fulgence?
On mute.
Sorry, I was muted. I didn't realize that. I was saying that I was saying that the OECS don't have one standard per se. They adopt the CARICOM standards that are developed. The only difference is that they're now putting in a framework for free circulation of goods, which will require all member states to adopt that standard, right? And so they follow the CARICOM regional standards and adopt them accordingly. Yeah, so they don't really have a system per se, which is different from what exists in the wider Caribbean, in the wider Caribbean.
Thank you, Fulgence. And I would just ask Andy to comment on how important the regional standards and how important it is to build consensus. Because if we look at UCS, that would only be a limited group. So Andy, could you comment on the benefits of that wider consensus-based process?
Thank you, Nadita. So in terms of governance, there's this new trend, what they call democratic decision-making, where you take into consideration different viewpoints in helping you make a decision for your next step. And in the world of standards, that's what we do. We bring together industry, academia, regulators to help determine a common best practice. It's not just one sector of the industry driving the requirements, but you're able to find a balance. And we do this through consensus and making sure that there's no sustained objection, but there's agreement on what we can go to putting forward. So we like to say standards development is one choir with many voices, where we bring all these parties together to get the requirements. In terms of regional standards, it helps boost our trade facilitation within the region, in that there's a common document if one members use it to adopt in their own countries that they can use to have requirements for products to have facilitate that intra-regional trade.
Thank you, Andy. It is very important across the region that we look at that consensus-based process, because it allows all the member states to contribute. And I think that is the major benefit to participating in CrossQ. So on that note, I would now like to turn it over to Nikeshi. And there's a question from Mr. Christopher Chinapu. He indicated that he didn't see anything on waste management and tourism standards. And in keeping with the focus on resilience and sustainable tourism, how is the issue of waste management being addressed in the regional standards?
Thank you, Nadita. So waste management is actually addressed in CRS 70, the draft CRS 70. The title for that is Solid Waste Management Requirements. Right, and the standard actually goes into how you measure. They ask you to measure your waste, monitor your waste, review the waste that you generate. They speak a little bit about reuse, recycle, and recovery, safe disposal. They're going to they look at it like your housekeeping activities in terms of how those activities or procedures those staff members handle the waste, making sure that they handle the waste as required. And yeah, so that's how that standard looks at waste management.
Thank you, Nikeshi. I would now like to turn the floor to Dr. Shuker. And the question is, what are the specific recommendations to improve the quality infrastructure to address the issue of traceability on a systemic level for chocolate producers?
Okay, so this is why as part of the regional standard for cocoa beans, we are considering elements of traceability, because we recognize that the traceability element for chocolate products actually reside in the traceability concerns for where the beans would have come from. So that element of traceability is going to be covered under the work that is proposed for the regional standard for cocoa beans. Traceability at the moment for chocolate is linked to the sourcing of beans, right? So that is more adequately, so that would be more adequately addressed and covered under the bean standard that we are looking at.
Thank you, Dr. Shuker. I wanted to pose the next question to both you and Dr. Mohammed and then turn it over to Fulgence. Now, it concerns so the question is, has statistical data been used to cover the needs of the special needs of differently abled children? So really the question would be, how do we address the needs of vulnerable populations within standardization? So Dr. Shuker, since you're on the floor, if you wanted to comment about that as part of the standards development process, and then I'll go to Dr. Mohammed.
Right, so that is actually a hard question to answer in the context of the mandate, because, okay, the mandate is really, at least for the team that I led, was to consider the range of products that are possible, and based on the information available and studies in terms of formulation, right? Now, looking at the special needs of different groups is where it transfers now into the medical use or the pharmaceutical use, which is a different consideration, where now you have to consider dosing. So for example, if you want to look at the impact of dark chocolate consumption on special needs in terms of increasing cognitive function and so on, you would have to use the standard for dark chocolate, where you have a certain percentage that would make up the formulation for dark chocolate, and then you decide, okay, do we give 40 grams of dark chocolate to the person in that study, and then measure brain function, right? So the standard does not link directly to the medical part, but it contributes to the standardization of the product that is used for the dosing for the medical study. So it's two different things, but the standard really focuses on the product conformance in terms of formulation and recipe.
Thank you, Dr. Shuker. I'll turn it over to Dr. Mohammed, because a lot of the chemical products are closely linked to hazards and toxicities. So, Dr. Mohammed?
Yes, I think in developing standards in general, we're not speaking to any one particular standard, but in standards in general, that consideration has to be given to persons of special needs within our population. Generally, this is considered when developing standards and when implementing regulatory values or regulatory requirements of these standards. So typically, yes, they are actually considered when formulating and developing standards. There are, however, special cases that may make it that may fall outside of the realm, and in those special cases, you may need to have precautionary statements, at least to protect manufacturers and protect the users of the standards as well. But generally, yes, generally the standards are usually designed to take into consideration all levels of the population, not just the main level, but also people who are differently able, and especially children. Standards designs are not for adults only. So.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. I would like to bring in both Nikeshi and Andia, because both of them have been involved in standards projects where the specific focus would be on differently abled and persons with disabilities. So I could start with Andia and then go to Nikeshi.
Thank you, Nadita. So Dr. Mohammed is right. Inclusivity and accessibility are some of the major contribution factors that we have in developing our standards. There are actually international guidelines for standards developers to use and reference them when developing standards. A good example is we're currently in a pandemic, if most persons have forgotten, and there's a standard for safe working during the pandemic, and it's part of the requirements included how to design a safe workplace for persons with disabilities, because we might not be thinking it, but for persons who require tactile functions, such as a person who's blind, who needs to be able to touch surfaces to move around, how then do we create a safe environment for them in a no-touch pandemic? So it is factored into our standards. It depends on the type of subject. So for example, if it's a food product, we might look at labeling to make sure that it's legible for persons of a variety of ages and disabilities, that it can be read in that regard. Okay, so I'll hand it over to Nikeshi as well.
Hi, yes. And just to echo what everyone else is saying, I could give examples in terms of like in the tourism sector, when you're looking at like a space, for example, like a hotel, or if you're looking at someone going to a park or entering any public space, right? Of course, considerations have to be given to persons of special need or persons that need special assistance, right? And usually what we will do is that we will go to those we'll make reference to those technical standards to assist, right? And we would usually just have some guidelines, some additional guidelines that would help. But yeah, we always make sure that we have some sort of reference that we allow persons, that we direct persons to, if it's not directly covered under the scope of the standard. Of course, if it's directly covered under the scope of the standard, then the requirements will be listed under that same standard. But yes, it's always a consideration. It's always something that we think about. For example, something as simple as having ramps to enter into establishment, or when you have to go into washroom, you know. So you might think that you have one step to go into a bathroom facility and that should be okay. But that, for someone who is wheelchair bound, is of course a big issue. So we always have to remember to, you know, keep updated and keep in the back of our minds when we are developing our requirements, to make sure that we always always have requirements that would suit them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikeshi. So I will turn it over to Fulgence because there's a continuation of the issue. And the comment again is from Miguel saying there appears to be a vacuum in the engagement of a special needs and differently abled community. Are consultations held with this category of society and in compiling standards? So Fulgence, I invite you to give your thoughts around that.
Yeah, let me just indicate to Miguel, thanks for the question. Miguel, as I would have indicated in the standards development process, stakeholder engagement is key, right? It's vital to the process, and we encourage, we develop our standards through our member states, right? And we always encourage full stakeholder engagement. And so the differently able is no exception. We expect our bureaus to engage with them and also to get the necessary information and requirements inputted into the standard, whether it be through commenting or whether it be directly participating on the technical committee responsible for the development of that standard. And as the other speakers would have indicated, it all depends on the standard, the type of standard that is being developed. Some of them you will have a more direct engagement than others, right? And so yes, it's something that we encourage. And I know that most of our NSBs do ensure that that kind of consultation and engagement is carried out.
Thank you, Fulgence. So I would also like to add to the discussion At TTBS, we have also engaged directly with the NGOs involved, as well as the ministry that is responsible for persons with disability. We would have developed an accessibility code. So in terms of providing and outfitting buildings with the proper requirements for persons with special needs, and that is one example. And DIA would have recently worked on adaptive systems for vehicles to facilitate entry of persons with disabilities. So in a lot of instances, we deal directly with the ministry responsible, as well as the NGOs in particular areas. But Fulgence, before you leave, let me ask this question. And this is really an update as to the work of what CROSCU is doing. So there was a comment regarding, so let me just find it again. What eco-friendly packaging benchmark will be used in the standard to prevent absorption of carcinogenic compounds from plastics, aluminum, etc.? So perhaps you can speak about the project on the biodegradable products.
Yes, so first of all, let me just indicate that the advent of the circular economy, right? We have embarked on a number of projects. One such project is the development of the biodegradable products, which will take all these considerations, all these factors into consideration, right? It has been under development for a while. I guess that is why it is like about almost 2 years that since they have been working on that. They've got quite a number of comments, which does take in consideration your matters that you have just highlighted. And I'm expecting at the end that we will get a standard that is holistic in nature to take on the concern that you would have mentioned.
Thank you, Fulgence. And in relation to another query from Mr. Singh, he commented, it is extremely difficult to source foods that have 0 or less preservatives. So just to echo what Fulgence would have indicated previously, there is active work happening in terms of labeling of prepackaged foods and also nutritional labeling, where CROSCU is indeed doing work that looks at the proper requirements for food packaging and also the need for declaration of certain information to enable the consumer, and especially when there are special needs for various categories of society to benefit from. So Fulgence, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, because our standards development is really based on international standards, yeah, right? And so whatever requirements are out there internationally, right, we would ensure that we're able to benchmark those requirements into our standards. And that is very important to us, right? And of course, through our stakeholder engagement, we get additional requirements being preferred to be included in the standard. Okay, so yes, our labeling of prepackaged foods would have requirements as stipulated by Codex. It would have requirements based on the US market. It would have requirements based on the European market. And so we try to take on a holistic view of the requirements and input it into the standard. Just as an example.
Thank you, Fulgence. So I just wanted to, go back to Dr. Mohammed and Dr. Shuker being part of academia, but also being very integral to the industry development for certain sectors. So I'll pose a question written in the chat. What are the cost benefits or savings to be derived from using these standards, and are any statistics available?
Yes, I can answer that one. Yes, there are statistics that are available. What we usually find when we look at studies of organizations that have adopted standards, right, throughout this organization, is that you see an initial increase in operating costs due to capital expenditure needed for implementation of the standard, but then you get a gradual reduction in costs as standardization of processes and standardization of procedures tend to lead to general cost reductions, and you get improved performance, reduced downtime, right, lower maintenance costs, etc. So in the long term, standards do lead to a reduced cost in production, and we do have the statistics to prove it. It is, of course, preceded by an initial increase in cost due to capital expenditures and changes in worker culture, etc. But in the long term, it definitely does reduce production costs, and in return drives the overall cost of the product, and therefore benefits the consumer in terms of costing and prices.
Thank you,
Yeah, so
Dr. Mohammed.
I actually want to mirror that response and say yes. So in my area, working with the bean tobacco chocolate makers, I mean, I am constantly bombarded by questions saying that the cost of meeting all these standards are expensive, getting all of the testing done and so on. And so yes, there is an initial cost, and sometimes there is an initial hesitance, and the perception with a younger client in the sector that it's more of a hindrance. But I think as the user of the standard gets once their market expands, and this is because chocolate is in the region is still evolving, you would see that once the people who are making the chocolates, they expand their markets, they reap the benefit of economies of scale. So the costs actually go down, and they actually are able to access more markets because they're meeting the standards. So for the chocolate sector, because it's still young, there is a need for long-term studies to track that. So I don't know offhand if there are any studies for the region for chocolate, but there is certainly a need. But I agree, there is that initial cost, and then as the markets are established and markets expand, the cost goes down.
I could just chime in here, Nalita. Yeah, you
No problem. Go ahead, Fulgence.
You also have not just the product standard implementation as that would have been indicated, where you have variety control, stocks, and everything. So when you're implementing a standard, that actually bring down your costs eventually. You also have implementation of quality management standards as well, right? Which would further, by the fact that you would be implementing procedures and processes that you continuously do, everybody aware of what they're doing, right? So you have less possibility of mistakes occurring and reformulating and reworking. Rework is lessened, and so your actual production cost is lessened, and you can pass that on to the consumer eventually. And of course, as Dr. just indicated, access to various markets, right? You have the process, you have the possibility of greater production, right? And then reducing the cost eventually to the consumer. So standards definitely impact the final cost of your consumer.
Hi, and I'll just like to add to that contribution, because, we always have the question, that especially in the tourism industry, sometimes the cost of implementing the standard, operators kind of look at that and they're wondering why it is, there is a need. And as the saying goes, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and just 5 seconds to earn it. So if you think about that, you would realize that it's sometimes really important to put these systems in place and find a new way of doing things differently, so that you reduce the possible mishaps that could happen going forward. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikeshi. So there's a query from Dr. Mohammed. So I will take that one. And the question is, organic certified foods are becoming popular and quite necessary in some cases. Will TTBS be involved in the near future in certifying organic foods? So this is related to another question that came up earlier. So in terms of TTBS, we are not directly responsible for food, drugs, and cosmetics, as well as medical devices. Those products or product categories fall under the Chemistry, Food and Drugs division. So we have a limitation on what we can certify, what we can inspect, and that is primarily the responsibility of the CFDD in Trinidad and Tobago. However, we actively participate in the regional standards development process and contribute and work with CFDD and other stakeholders in the food industry to support the regional standards development process regarding food. So in one way, we can contribute to the standards development, but we have a limitation in terms of exactly how far we can go in terms of certifying and testing. So there's a fine line, and we have a good working relationship with CFDD to help us define which areas. So for example, we would have worked on the GAP standard, the good agricultural practices, because essentially we're looking at a system and not necessarily at the product itself. And there was a question earlier, and I'll just respond to it in terms of what the TTBS's mandate. So the question about implementation or enforcement or compliance with a standard for chocolate is essentially a voluntary activity, and TTBS doesn't have the direct regulatory role for that. And I invite Dr. Shuker to comment on that as well.
Yes, so at the moment, I as far as I know that, so there are mandatory things that you have to do linked to food safety with respect to the standards at the regional standards. They are not, they're not compulsory. So I think this is where chemistry, food and drugs, and liaising with the relevant agencies like Export TT and so on, and also the markets for which our cocoa and chocolate products have to access. We also need to meet their standards. So once we have our standards and guidelines in place, and if our manufacturers adhere to some of them, in terms of the product specification, there are overarching food safety standards that they will have to meet. So there is a lot of dialogue that has to occur with the key players, especially if you are trying to access markets either regionally or extra regionally.
Thank you, Dr. Shuker. So I think we pretty much covered a lot of the questions in the chat raised by the participants, and very interesting and insightful questions as well. And we are 23 minutes past our closing time, and we initially had the panel discussion, but perhaps I will go in order of the key issues that we wanted to highlight in order. So I will start with fulgence. And in terms of all the regional work that we have been doing, what do you believe has the most potential for export diversification and expansion of intra-regional trade?
Thanks, Nobita. I think really that most of our work has concentrated on food and food products, right? Processed food especially. And I believe based on directives coming out of COTED, right, which is the Council for Trade and Economic Development, as it pertains to agriculture, they have identified certain products, right, that they would like to see move forward. And I think it's not just about intra-regional trade. I think we also have to concentrate on extra-regional and see how we could build our competitiveness extra-regional as well. So whatever we decide, whatever product we decide to go to in terms of exporting, I think it should not just be focused on regional, it should also focus on the potential extra-regionally as well. And as such, I believe it's not just looking at the processed food and agriculture, but also building sustainability into our standards. And so we need to really move to that next level, right, as to develop sustainable standards. If we're talking about meeting our SDGs, yeah, and so that is where we need to look to. And there's also niche markets for these. For instance, cocoa. Cocoa is one of the products that's identified, yeah, for special focus, yeah, as well as spices, herbs and spices, aquaculture. And so we need to be able to come up with sustainability standards in these areas so that we don't just capture the regional market, but also look at our potential extra-regionally for exports.
Okay, thank you, Fulgence. I will now go to Dr. Shuker. And we would have highlighted previously the new work item proposal for the regional standards related to cocoa quality, cocoa beans. So what opportunity do you think that this proposal represents for our region?
Well, basically, I think it represents a tremendous opportunity in terms of leveraging and marketing our small volumes of cocoa microlots that we produce across the region in boutique markets for cocoa beans and chocolate. It also represents an opportunity to integrate cocoa and chocolate into other business models, such as eco-culinary tourism, building on what we have already. So cocoa becomes a synergistic element in different models. Also, we have cocoa being a very amenable crop for watershed management. It's a natural understory crop of the rainforest, right? So, and having cocoa and chocolate be part of that eco-culinary tourism model will have a great benefit to empower rural communities. And this is happening in Trinidad. So we have Lupino, we have Brasso Seco, for example. And this has an important role to play in the post-COVID recovery for our region, where we have cocoa and chocolate destinations, basically. So in this regard, the regional standards for cocoa and chocolate beans and cocoa and chocolate products are very important in terms of bolstering confidence in both the beans that are produced for the region and products, cocoa and chocolate products that are produced in the region for the local market as well as for regional and export markets.
Thank you, Dr. Shuker. I will turn the floor over to Dr. Mohammed, given his depth of experience in the area of chemistry, chemical production, testing, etc. And given the volume of work that is being done at the regional level with sodium hypochlorite solutions, hand sanitizers, could you tell us what role or what else we can do at the regional level to support our countries to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and the post-COVID-19 world that we hope to see soon?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that question, Nadita. So, you know, with this whole COVID-19 situation, this global COVID-19 pandemic that we see happening, one thing that began to become very glaring to me is the great disparity and demarcation between developed countries and developing countries such as ourselves. Right? We saw that vaccines, for example, being able to acquire vaccines was very difficult for developing countries like ourselves, whereas developed countries had easier access to it. And this sort of tells us that as a region, we need to become independent, and we have to be able to stand on our own, you know. And to me, this message was loud and clear. At least that was one learning from this COVID-19 pandemic, right? And this is one area where regional standards will definitely help to ensure that our products are world-class, that our consumers are guaranteed high quality, all right? So this pandemic therefore served kind of like a wake-up call to establish our regional standards, to harmonize it with global standards, right? Develop our industries and build capacity. Because as we expect in the post-pandemic world, we expect that there will be some booms in certain industries as the world sort of wakes up and gets out of this whole lockdown situation. And with those booms, there are open avenues for increased trade that we as a region can capitalize on. You know, so we can use our standards to build our quality, make ourselves harmonized globally, develop our industries, build our capacities, and prepare to flood the market with Caribbean products. At least that's how I see it.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. I would just like to bring back Dr. Shuker into the conversation. We have a very interesting question from Mr. Chinipu in the chat. how far advanced are we on the work of the geographic indicators for the cocoa and coffee industry? So the issue of GI.
Yeah, so that is actually a very nice question in the context of, so there is a GI registered locally for cocoa that comes from Central Trinidad, the Montserrat Hills region. And I worked with the stakeholder body from that region to prepare the application for a GI to be registered with the EU. And as with any sort of certification, you need to have a certain amount of internal organization and record keeping, having your SOPs and standard operating procedures along with best practices in place. So and making a case as to why it is your product is unique, because GI is an exclusionary sort of certification where you are saying my product deserves to be treated separately and handled separately because it is different from all the others. So you need to make a case for that. And that case, especially with the EU, is based on science. So we work closely with the stakeholders, and we are still working with them to carry out evaluations over a number of years to understand how the flavor profile for the cocoa from the Trinidad Montserrat Hills region is different from the rest of Trinidad, and to demarcate the area and so on. So that work is happening, it's ongoing, and it's a very exciting development for cocoa. For coffee in Trinidad, not so much, but the coffee industry is still, it's actually getting a boost from a few of the private sector players who are trying to really create a sort of specialty market for Trinidad coffee. So that work is happening as well.
Thank you, Dr. Shuker. I would just like to address one last question. I would like to close off the Q&A, but it came in from Miguel Singh. Now, it's a long question, but how are consumers protected if the standard establisher tracks legal action for failure to protect the consumer? So just in terms of Trinidad and Tobago, there is work happening regarding the Consumer Protection Bill that is being advanced by the Consumer Affairs Division under the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Where TTBS has compulsory standards, we have the responsibility for enforcement, and our penalties are defined within Standards Act. So that is handled in a different way. We are talking about essentially compulsory standards issued by TTBS, which are effectively law. And there's a question that came in from Mr. Bihari. Mr. Bihari, please feel free to email us and we will get the questions to the panelists. And I would like to just pose this one last question to both Andia and Nikeshi as we seek to close off the session. How can we improve our communications about standards and encourage stakeholders to get involved in the development process? So perhaps, Andy, you could start and then we'll go to Nikeshi.
Hi, Nadita. Thanks for that question. So I think a great place to start is what we're doing right now in having these open webinars and highlighting all the various work and standards that we're doing. And in one of our previous sessions, we also highlighted the need to integrate work on standards or knowledge about standards with the education sector and have our students start to become more familiar with it. Because what we always say in the standards world is, in school, you never hear about standards, but when you start to work, everything is standardized, all the codes that you use and everything. So it's a good way to bring in the students from the onset as they're learning about it in school.
Thank you, Andia. I'll invite Nikeshi to comment on that as well.
Yeah, so I agree with Andia said, make the standards relatable, but also I would add that we have been utilizing as the CTBS has been utilizing all of our social media platforms. So we are on Facebook. We have posts, like, for example, the session, we post these sessions live on YouTube. We also have an Instagram page. So we encourage you all, if you all want to know more about what we are doing, follow us. And Nelly, periodically we always put up updates in terms of what projects we are on, what projects we are working on, and information about our sessions. So that's the best way for you to get information about what we are doing, to be aware of what we are doing and be in the know. So I encourage you to join our pages. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkechi. And I believe Latoya has been sharing a lot of information in the chat about the work of CrossQ. And we also encourage everyone to take a look at the CrossQ's social media as well. And now in the age of digital technologies, social media, a lot of information is now quickly available. So I would like to invite, all the panelists to give their closing thoughts. Where do we go next? What is the future like for regional standardization? So perhaps we could start with Dr. Mohammed and then go to Dr. Shuker, Fulgence, and then we can close off as standardization.
Yeah, I think as a region, standardization is a critical issue for growth and development as a region. I think, however, that standardization, that standards and knowledge on standards should really start from the consumer, right? Not from the manufacturer, because the consumer is who drives the manufacturer, right? Having been in both the manufacturing sector and in the regulatory sector, I can tell you that as manufacturers, implementing standards does have a significant cost to it. But if it is driven by the customer, then that cost is worth it, because it means that it now becomes part of your business. It is a business decision that has to be made. So I think as a region, it's important that consumers in the region drive standards forward. And I think the bureau is actually doing an excellent job in bringing information to the consumer and to the general public, who are the consumers, right? And gaining feedback and basically educating the consumer, right? So I think that is a key area that is already being built by the bureau and should continue, certainly, right? But I think standards are a critical part for our own growth and development as a region. I think it's very important for future trade and development, and for us as a region and as a people to grow. We need to have these harmonized standards, not just independent standards, but harmonized standards.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. I'll turn it over to Dr. Shuker.
For me, there are two things as we look ahead. Standards must be relevant. The standards and the associated protocols must be considered relevant and meaningful by the stakeholders that are trying to meet them, and by the client that stands to benefit, including the customers, right? Standards must also be pragmatic, I believe, in that if it sets a target that is impossible to meet or contains protocols that are beyond the means and resources of the stakeholder to execute them, then you would have failures, right? And no one wins in that scenario. So we need to be really mindful and clear of the essential need or needs that a standard is supposed to meet, and be as simple and efficient and pragmatic as possible in crafting the standard that considers the users on both sides of that fence, the people who have to abide by them and the people who stand to benefit from the standard.
Thank you, Dr. Shuker. So I invite Fulgence to give his thoughts, what is next for regional standardization?
Thanks, Ladita. I think we need to take it to the next level. We need to be able to get our policy makers understand the role of quality infrastructure in increasing the competitiveness of our region and the products emanating from the region. We are part of a global village, and so it cannot just be about the region, it has to be about the global stage. And for us to be able to increase our competitiveness on the global stage, we need to be able to participate in international standards development. How do we participate in international standards development? we need to become members of the International Organization for Standardization and to increase our membership. Right? I think that is critical for us to do so and to be able to participate as a region. So for now, instead of spending time, because standards development is a very costly venture. And so where we could pool our resources together and impact on the development of international standards is critical. Yeah, and so we could pool our resources together and participate as a region so that once we have impacted on those standards, we could adopt those standards seamlessly as national standards and thereafter declare them as international standards. And so we should focus in that particular area.
Thank you, Fulgence. I will turn it over to Nikeshi now to add her thoughts. You know, she's been very active in a number of areas ranging from tourism, quality management, but also ICT. So I invite Nikeshi to give her thoughts around where we go next as a standards community.
Well, I just wanted to say that, you know, Fulgence was talking about standardization being, you know, expensive activity. And one of the areas that I find sometimes that we don't get enough participation is with feedback from the public. Even we receive the feedback at the wrong stage, or when we do get feedback, it isn't clear, you know, so get involved, you know, when you see the ads, and if you are part of the interested parties group, make sure and send in your feedback at the right time, you know, make sure that you meet that deadline, because it becomes very problematic for us to submit comments after the process or try to retrofit after, you know, the standard has passed that process. So yes, you know, there is always talk about standards, there's talk about harmonizing standards, but that cannot be done unless we get everyone feedback from our local stakeholders, so that at the right time, so that we'll be able to input it during the standards process and get the appropriate feedback. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Nikita.
Thank you, Nikeshi. So I'll turn it over to Andrea to give her closing comments on the same issue. Andrea, go ahead.
Thanks, Nadita. So our colleagues at the British Standards Institute would have done a paper called Agile Standards, and it looked at the new ways of developing standards. And one of them was a modular approach or iterative standards. So when there is not enough information about a topic as yet, but you send it out as you have and quickly update as more and more information becomes available, instead of the 5-year review cycle that we have for standards. And it's something that they would have used for COVID-19 when we had a pandemic with limited information available. And it's something that we can look at from a standards development point of view, because we're very good at anticipating the trends and developing standards to meet those topics, but probably looking at how do we redesign our product itself to help meet the needs of stakeholders and how it can be used for them in their applications. So I know there are some NSPs, national standards bodies abroad, who are trying to digitize the code so that you can access it on your cell phone as you go about and use it from that point of view. I also think that we should probably look at having some greater dialogue when our standards are being used and getting that feedback from regulators, so we know where are some of the problems or where it's working then, and that can help us in our revision process for it. I could give an example for our standard for CNG. One of the feedback we were getting from regulators is that it's a requirement to have that little blue diamond sticker on CNG vehicles, but a lot of consumers don't like it, so they would pull it off for aesthetic values. And when I had that information, when we would have those workshops or the information booths for the CNG symposiums, I mentioned to the persons that it's a safety requirement. So if you get in an accident, it allows the fire services to know that it's a CNG vehicle and it needs to be de-energized. So from that little bit of feedback, we were able to share the information and talk with stakeholders. So I think that's a good process we can go from there.
Okay, thank you so much, Andia. So I would like to thank all the participants for staying on. We are 45 minutes after the expected close time, but the questions were very insightful and the responses from the panelists today, we deeply appreciate the technical expertise from Dr. Mohammed, Dr. Shuker, the standardization expertise from Fulgen. So we have always been working very closely with CrossQ to ensure that we are on board with regional harmonization. I'd like to thank Latoya for her opening remarks or the excellent presentations that we had over today's session. I'm sure it was well appreciated, and it was an opportunity for TTBS to share the work that is being done around regional standardization and attract a new group of stakeholders to bring them into that standardization community. So on behalf of TTBS as well as CrossQ, I'd like to thank all the participants for showing up today, staying on with us long after the closing time. We deeply appreciate your time and investment in our standardization activities. And please feel free to contact us if you need any further information. We have Nikeshi, Andia, Fuljan, Dr. Shuker, Dr. Mohammed available if there are any queries. They're all deeply invested in building regional standards that will help with our common future. It is about sustainability, digitization, expanding our offerings to the global market, and standardization, standards, regional standards, international standards, national standards, all play key roles. So I would like to bring the session to a close and again, thank everyone. We were live on YouTube, so the session is available there. We will also liaise with CrossQ in terms of getting a pre-recorded session on regional standardization that will be accessible to all stakeholders. And finally, the participants, without you, the session would not have been so engaging. I appreciate all the comments that came and all the questions. It was a way for the experts on the panel and from regional standardization like CrossQ and national experts to share their information and disseminate knowledge about the regional process. So on that note, thank you again, and we are available for any questions later on, and we will bring the session to a close by playing a brief video to acknowledge a milestone for the country. Andia would have won the ISO Next Generation Award. So Andia, you can play the video and we will close the session after. Thank you again.
Hello world, my name is Andia Prasad Maraj and I'm a Standards Officer at the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards. I started off here as a design engineer, but everything was standardized, so I thought, okay, I'd write the standards, and thus began my love affair in this field of standardization. I'm a cool, calm professional with a tiny mischievous streak. On a professional scale and on a personal scale, I am deeply honored and excited to accept the ISO Next Generation Award for 2021. Having a background in mechanical engineering and international trade, at TTBS, I hold the national standards portfolios for energy efficiency, occupational health and safety, and automotive products. At the regional level, I represent Trinidad and Tobago at the Technical Management Committee of our CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality. And last year, I was elected as the chair of the editorial committee for CARICOM Regional Standards.
Andia has made a tremendous contribution to standards that improve sustainability at the national, regional, and international levels. As a member of the DevCo Chairs Advisory Group, this award is a testimony to the significant contributions that developing countries provide to the international standardization system. On a personal level, I feel like a proud parent today, and I'm confident that Andia will maximize this fantastic opportunity with ISO.
I'm really interested in being able to interact with experts and other officers involved in the field of standardization. I'm particularly interested in learning about the strategies for incorporating sustainability development into our standards so that we're not just making standards to solve today's problems, but standards that can help us create a shared vision for a better world.
The Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards is humbled and delighted that Ms. Andhya Prasad Maharaj has won the 2021 ISO Next Generation Award. This is a significant accomplishment for Andhya, TTBS, and the country. We wish Andhya best of luck in the uptake of this award as we continue to promote the adoption and use of international standards to drive sustainability agenda within Trinidad and Tobago.
Fun fact, when I first started my career in standardization, ISO was having a campaign on their Facebook page, and I happened to win one of the prizes. And I've saved the envelope all these years because it was the first thing I ever won in my entire life. This award is the second. But I also know that I wouldn't be here without the love and support of God, my parents, friends, family, and mentors. Thank you all for everything you've done to support me. In applying for the award, one of the questions we were asked was, what does sustainability mean to you? Sustainability is personal. It's just not for us, but it's for everyone. And I'm thrilled to be part of the ISO Next Generation Award in creating this platform for helping foster young professionals and driving sustainability standardization. I'll see you all in Geneva next year.
So thank you, everyone. We officially bring the session to a close, and please stay in touch with us if there are any queries around our standardization activities. So goodbye, everyone.